Okay, then. Good morning to those of you here on the West Coast, and afternoon or evening, wherever you might be. I'm not sure who else was here today. We're continuing in this kind of mini series that Rabbi Marsha asked me to share with you some of my interfaith experiences. This, of course, has become more important, I think, in the last 2 weeks of this horrible war that we're in. I'm happy to report to those that don't live here in Palm Springs that we had a wonderful interfaith vigil service last Thursday at St. Paul's Episcopal Church with the mayor and the local CEO of the Jewish Federation and a Muslim woman from Redlands, Universal Unitarian, really kind of all the many different faiths represented. And we will certainly be doing more of this as well. So this is in the same spirit of interfaith dialogue, even though perhaps most of the folks here today consider themselves Jewish. I spoke the last 2 times, and the first time was taken up quite a bit because of the war with another topic. I spoke about mostly just my experiences with Christians and how it began in earnest in 2001 after 9/11. Spoke about Taizé. I spoke about the community of the Beatitudes in Israel and our ongoing Psalm study that we did for 7 years, and added a few anecdotes here and there, whatever came to mind, while still looking at some texts. Today, the texts that I've brought are texts that reflect a little bit of my encounters with Islam. And for this, we kind of have to go back to before 9/11 and the 2000s, the 90s, when I was a rabbi in Yar Ramot, in the northern suburb of Jerusalem, Ramot. There was a man who had the keys to many of the homes of our members. They all lived in this one big kind of project they had all bought at the same time. Lots of English speakers, hence a Masorti conservative synagogue that was built in that area, or that they succeeded in building. And this fellow's name, who was also the fix-it and gardener for Kilat Yaramot, for my congregation, was Mahmud. His name is Mahmud. And I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know his last name. I never knew his last name, though we saw each other every single day. We had tea together every day I was there for 6 years, 7 years. And basically every day we had a cup of tea together. He had planted some mint near a runny faucet in our garden, so we had in the congregation's garden, so we had plenty of mint, and we would talk. His Hebrew was pretty good. He had been working all of his life on the other side of the Green Line and the inside of the Green Line. There were times when the border crossing was cut off, and he kind of sometimes had to smuggle himself in different ways to get there, and we kept it very quiet. Constantly people were bringing him stuff and old clothes for his large family in a village near Gush Etzion, the Etzion block, which is a controversial area. I originally thought maybe we'd look at that text to see how there was a slaughter. We call it slaughter now. It was an ambush. In war, it's so hard to find the right words. I noticed a lot of the reporting in the beginning in Israel were calling all those who had died murdered, which is true, of course, when Hamas came in and did what they did. Is that the same? Is it murder when it's a soldier who's shooting back and forth? Is that murder as well? And does it matter? I'm not sure. In any case, there was a well-known story of a group of Palmachnikim in the 1948 war who were ambushed and killed. There were 35, and they're called the Lamed Hey, and they were on their way to bringing help to Gush Etzion, and all of this came from the ones that came out who in the history books that I was fed, or the stories I was fed, were the murderers, but in any case, those that ambushed them came out of a particular village. I'm not going to mention the name of the village, and so did many of the terrorists over the years in the 80s and the 90s. And Mahmud was from this particular village. And yet he had the key to so many people's homes, so they could go in and fix what needed to be fixed in the gardens. So Mahmud and I got to know each other, know about his kids. I remember him telling me that his boy, his oldest boy, all he wanted to see, he wanted to be able to go to the airport. We were trying to figure out how we could get him and his kid with us, and I was going to drive them to the airport so we could see planes landing and taking off. That was this little kid's. His daughter wanted to see the sea. She'd never seen the sea before. And, it seems trite now, and it seems, and of course, we were the ones with the power, and he was not. And yet another relationship that, that one thinks of over the years. But the most precious memory I have of Mahmud was with his family. We met one Friday. Sasha made challah with the girls, and we met him in a grove of pine trees in Gush Etzion, where he was allowed to be, he and his family. We sat under the trees, and I could speak a little bit of Arabic, so could Sasha. His wife didn't speak any Hebrew, and Mahmud spoke Hebrew. He translated, and our kids kind of played with his kids. And she brought pita and olive oil that they made in their village. By the way, every year he brought us a big bottle of olive oil, the most delicious olive oil in the world. And that was Mahmud. That is Mahmud. I don't know what happened to Mahmud, and I think I feel bad about that. As somebody who was important to my life and my community's life, somebody who took care of us for years. I'd like to think that today I would make sure that I knew his name, the name of all of his children and his wife, and would keep them in my prayers. But I think of Mahmud quite often. And in coming up with one of my illiterate titles for this particular meeting, I know this is our third meeting. I call it part 2 because it's Islam. The first 2 we had to make them longer about Christianity. Is Mohammed, of course, the major figure in Islam, the Prophet Mohammed. And Mahmud was my friend of the 90s and Midrash. And so I want to begin with that anecdote for what it's worth. It's not necessarily a religious dialogue, although he didn't teach me the terms, but he taught me to say quite often, Ilhamdulillah and Inshallah. Ilhamdulillah is what we would say in Hebrew, Baruch Hashem, thank God. And Inshallah is God willing, Bezrat Hashem. And his words were constantly peppered with that. I'm not sure I ever saw him pray, maybe during the day when he was up in Ramot with us. I don't know that he didn't, but I don't think I ever saw him take out a prayer rug. I'm not sure he was that multadaini in Arabic, if he was that observant. In any case, let's go to gallery here. If there are those who could, I know people are doing different things. If you're able to put on your camera, I'd appreciate it. On the other hand, if you're moving around all the time, perhaps not. If you could leave your camera in one place. So I'd like to see the folks that are with us today. So there was yet another pre-2001 contact that I had, and that was I was invited to a place called Givat Chaviva, which is there's an educational center and a place for teacher in-service training run by the kibbutz movement. So kind of Marcia, is it possible to just keep the camera in one place?
I'm sorry, I had to plug my
Okay,
laptop in.
Great, thank you.
Lisa.
Okay. I was getting a little seasick there. Okay, thank you. Okay, and so I was invited to Givat Chaviva to teach, do an in-service training units with some teachers from the Arab sector. And if I remember correctly, there were Muslims and Christians amongst these Arab teachers. But there was one particular guy who gave me, I would say, the evil eye, who looked at me and with a particular lack of love. Didn't look like he wanted to be there at all, with a very large beard that usually signifies the Muslim Brotherhood. And I did, this is part of the study that I did with them. My goal was, I was commissioned with, it was over Sukkot, and I was asked to teach them about Midrash, how it works. And so I chose, we did 2 sessions, 1 2.5-hour long sessions. One session was on halakha, and I brought with me my lulav and etrog, and we walked through how do we get from this practice of holding the 4 species from the biblical text. And there's quite a distance. And I wanted them to see, there's a text and there's what we do in Judaism, which is based on rabbinic. In this group, we've spoken about this issue many, many times, and you have with your other teachers. And then I wanted to show them something in Midrash Agadah, not just halakha, but Agadah. And I chose something that I thought would appeal to them, because I knew of the Muslim tradition. I hadn't been involved in official interfaith dialogue really, but I did go to Hebrew University and did take a course in medieval Muslim interpretation of Hebrew text and the polemic between Islam and Judaism. So a certain amount of knowledge I knew. And so I went for this particular story and what happens in Midrash Agadah, with the particular point of showing that we all have a lot to do. And I wanted to expose myself in fixing, in reevaluating our relationship. So if I could ask somebody to read a very familiar text, that's number 1. Sandy, would you like to read from Genesis 22?
Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test, saying to him, Abraham. He answered, Here I am. Take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So early next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servant, You stay here with the donkey, and the boy and I will go up there. We will worship, and we will return to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the 2 walked off together. Then Isaac said to his father, Abraham, Father. He answered, Yes, my son. And he said, Here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, It is God who will see to the sheep for this burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them walked on together. They arrived at the place of which God had told him. Abraham built the altar there, and he laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son.
Yeah, I don't want people to be hanging it. In the end, he doesn't kill his son. Just want to make sure everybody knows at the end of the story, 3 dots. But that's what we needed for this, right? So I had Xeroxed a page out of a Quran Tanakh, which is the standard kind of Tanakh that everybody has. It's a beautiful font. It's a font that was developed for that particular version of the Hebrew Bible, and that was on the page. It was the old day. It was the 90s, right? Wasn't yet doing all that much digital. Anything that was digital printed meant that I had to type it in. And I still have sheets from those days, and there's lots of typos, and they're almost all in Hebrew also. But so I just Xeroxed the story itself. But I knew I thought that I knew that the story amongst in Islam played out a little bit differently. And so I went and I looked up and I copied the relevant passage from the Quran. As you know, the Quran is scripture for Islam, and it's a tricky thing. There's a number of different translations, and it's a very sensitive issue. Translations you'll find not on all, but most websites that have Quran will have the Arabic there as well. In much the same way that I'm not doing it here. Perhaps others. In some classes, I bring the Hebrew text next to the English text so we can quickly relate to it, not for a moment to think that the English is the actual original that it's in. And I'll show you an example of that, or you saw an example on the second page, and I'll tell you where that's from. But so I go to the Quran and I come across or I find this particular tradition in the Quran itself, right? So Sylvia, you want to read number 2?
Yes, I can do that. Hang on a second. And when he reached with him the age of exertion, he said, "Oh, my son, indeed I have seen in a dream that I must sacrifice you. So see what you think." He said, "Oh, my father, do as you are commanded. You will find me, if Allah wills, of the steadfast." And when they had both submitted, and he put him down upon his forehead, we called to him, "O Abraham, you have fulfilled the vision. Indeed, we thus reward the doers of good."
Okay, so sounds like the same story, more or less. Yes, we often think of Isaac being like this, and I didn't bring that part of the story. It's clear from the tradition here that it doesn't happen. And what's the name of the son in this tradition here?
Oh,
Kind of a trick question.
Ishmael.
Ishmael, maybe, or maybe
But it
Isaac.
doesn't say Ishmael, though, does it?
It doesn't say it.
Right. So that was my first surprise. I think many of you say Ishmael because that's what many people have been told, that in the Muslim tradition it's Ishmael. So my first surprise was it's not in the Quran itself, the name Ishmael. Now, perhaps it's inferred, but in the research that I did at the time, including going up to Hebrew University and using the library, because not that much was on the internet at that time, I was able to find that there actually is at least one medieval Muslim commentator. What happened, again, this is not my specialty, but you have this tradition, hadith, this post-Quranic tradition of oral traditions, but they're very, very careful about whose tradition is accepted. It's kind of, it's not the opposite. It's very unlike our tradition of Rabbi so-and-so said this, who quoted to this one, but others say, no, he said this and that. It's kind of confused. There's a lot of talk there about what is the actual tradition of what Muhammad shared with his students. And so, so Ishmael's not mentioned here by name, but implied very much so. So I brought the next section, which is problematic. Probably, or I think most probably misattributed to Abbas here, but that's the name that you find it under, and so if anybody here is a scholar of Islam, I certainly beg your forgiveness. This is not my expertise, and this is a great example why, if somebody wants to do this kind of study, one should do it together with the person who knows about that literature. Now, it's not always possible, so I think this is better than not doing it at all. Maybe some people think it's better not to do it at all. You don't have an expert there. But what I could gather today is that this is a late quote. There's a quote of somebody, but it's misquoted. But the quote is found in the 13th, 14th centuries, and so that period of time. So, so Sylvia, why don't you go ahead and read this one as well? There's a commentary on what you read beforehand in the Quran. Sylvia, you want to read number 3? Just unmute first.
Unmute. Let me see if I can find it one more time. What do I do with it? I did something good.
Okay, in the meantime, Megan, why don't you read number 3 for us?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Abbas, I'll leave that out. And when his son was old enough to walk with him, when his son was old enough to strive for Allah and obey him, it is also said that this means when his son was old enough to walk with him in the mountains. Abraham said to his son Ishmael, and it is also said it was his son Isaac, "Oh, my dear son, I have seen in a dream that I must sacrifice thee. I am commanded in a dream vision to sacrifice you. So look, what thinkest thou? What do you say?" He said, "Oh, my father, do that which thou art commanded of sacrificing me. Allah willing, thou shalt find me of the steadfast in the face of this sacrifice."
So we see here that Ishmael is mentioned, but also mentioned here again. I don't know that if that was added afterwards, it was, but convenient. But some say that it was actually Isaac. So not necessarily Ishmael, because the point of the story is about devotion to God, and the names are a little bit less important, perhaps. So that's one thing to learn from this, a difference, because in the street, amongst Muslims, I think it's probably, if you asked any Muslim on the street, my guess would be they would say the story is about Ishmael, and I'll tell you in a second what happened in that classroom. But one of the things that we learned from the comparison is that Isaac himself was aware of this and was submissive in the Quran itself. Now that detail is added in some of the rabbinic traditions. Some of the rabbinic traditions have Isaac at 40 years old when this is happening, and he's very conscious. It seems to us, I think, from the story that he's a little boy and he doesn't know what's going on, where he says, "Abba, we have the fire, we have the altar. Where's the animal?" And yet something was missing. Somebody wanted to add that into the story as well. So that on one hand, that's different because it's in the scripture itself. The Quran itself talks about Isaac's being submissive. On the other hand, Quran is from the second half of the first millennium. And so that's rabbinic literature. And there's a lot of intersectionality between, I'm using that in a very different way than it's usually used, between Islamic storytelling and Jewish storytelling. That was the class that I did do at Hebrew University with Professor Chava Shafa of blessed memory. That was exactly about that particular topic, where in the polemic between Islam and Judaism in the Middle Ages, they were using from the same body of literature. Sometimes you find examples of Midrash, rabbinic Midrash from 12th, 13th century that show up in the Islamic commentaries, but used in a different way. In other words, there's so much that overlaps. It's like, we haven't talked about it so much, but this idea that once there was Judaism, then Christianity grew out of it, and there was a break. Well, there was a break at one time, but that was that took place over a long period of time. There wasn't a parting of ways at one point in history. As I'm learning more and more in my New Testament studies, it was a long period of time, perhaps 200 years, perhaps even more, where there were still congregations that were Jewish, very Jewish, but also believed in Christ as a savior, and they hadn't broken away from and continued to keep Shabbat on the seventh day, on Saturday, for instance. But back to this, there's this overlapping, and to me that brought me so much joy to find this particular thing. And we're getting through even before I got to the Quran. This man, the man with the very brooding eyes and the big beard, and perhaps that's just the way I remembered. He said to me, after we're reading from Breshit, from Genesis, he says, "Lama ta mishaker? Why are you lying?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Lama ta mishaker? Ta mishaker? Ze sheker." He puts his finger down, pointing to the text that was photocopied, was Xerox from the Hebrew Bible. This is a lie. It's not Isaac. It's Ishmael. I said, whoa, we'll get there. We'll get there. but it's not, I said, it's not a lie. This is our truth. And he said, no, this is a lie. And here he is sitting in my classroom in service training. And I could think one thing to myself, which has come up time after time in the last 2 weeks, is how are we ever going to bridge the gap? How are we ever going to bridge the gap? This is an educator, and he is willingly in this Jewish Israeli place for in-service training. And this is the and this, so I'm not complaining, I'm not criticizing, I'm not saying, oh, he does, like I've heard yesterday at a rally that I'm not sure a rally that I went to, they just don't understand. It's not so simple. It's not about they just don't understand. They need to be educated, right? That you hear from many people. You hear it on both sides. No, there's different understandings, there's different traditions, and that's a challenge. It's a huge, huge challenge. Yeah, but then I went on, and perhaps I made it even worse, because I thought I was going into a room of open minds, and I think that many of the educators there were, but this is what I had prepared, so I went ahead and did this as well. So who else do we have? Do you want to read first, Marcia? Number 4. This is from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is from the 7th century. We know, because of this passage and another passage, at least one other, maybe there's more, but one other that I can think of, we know to date Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer to no earlier than the 7th century because of this passage. But go ahead, Marcia. This is a Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is famous perhaps for its biblical, we call it the subgenre of biblical paraphrase. It's like telling a story again, but with more and more details. Go ahead.
Oh, I'd be happy to read, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to print out the study sheet.
No problem at all. Jack,
next
you want to
time.
read? Jack, do you have the text? Would you like to read? No. Okay. So take it again, Sandy. It's hard for me to relate to faces I can't see, folks. I would call on you, but if I can't see you, I don't know that you're really up for it. Go ahead.
On the 3rd day, they reached Zophim. And when they reached Zophim, they saw the glory of Shekinah resting upon the top of the mountain. As it is said, on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. What did he see? He saw a pillar of fire standing from the earth to the heavens. Abraham understood that the lad had been accepted for the perfect burnt offering. He said to Ishmael and Eliezer, "Do you see anything upon one of those mountains?" They said to him, "No." He considered them as dull as a donkey. He told them, "Since ye do not see anything, you stay here with the donkey, with such who are similar to an ass."
Okay, it's actually in Hebrew, it's even worse. It's Am Hadomeh Lechamur, right? Those, because what Abraham says in the biblical story is that says to his servants, it doesn't say who they are, it says to his servants, to the others that are there, you stay here with the donkey. We're going to go on by ourselves. That's how we've always learned the story. But Pirkei de Rabbi Lazar kind of fills in the gap, says, well, what he said, he looks up and he sees God's presence, and he knows he's on the right track. He knows he's doing the right thing, and Isaac sees it as well. The others don't see it, and they don't see it, so they have to stay back, because they stay back with the chamor, with the donkey, because they have the wit of a donkey. That's about Ishmael. I now looking back, that was not a wise decision for me to bring that particular tradition, especially with that one guy that was there. And that's how you learn. You learn by making mistakes. I share it with you now, and I would share it in certain circles, because we need to come clean as well. It's so often that we'll find things in our tradition, in other traditions, that we complain about. And let's set aside the war and the propaganda battles for media right now. It's just such a common thing. I don't remember if I told the story of in Sweden, there was a conference in my first year there that I went to, and there was a new document that had been put out by the Association for Christians and Jews, something like that. It's a mostly European organization. I'd known of, they had an Israel branch I'd known a little bit about before when I was in Israel. And I'm at this meeting with our cantor, who was a friend of mine, still is Maynard Gerber. In fact, now I was in my dream last night. That's interesting. And I guess because I knew I would tell this story today. And on this document, the document calls on everybody that it needed to be ratified or voted upon by, and people couldn't agree on it, right? But one of the issues was that each of us need to explore our own traditions, especially our liturgy, to make sure that we're not continuing that feeling, the feeling of superiority over the other. Now, the Jews were very excited about Vatican II in the 60s, about changing the liturgy of the Roman Catholic Mass and other aspects of Christianity, and calling for Jews to accept Christ and all the things. It even came up, by the way, this last Easter, and my two colleagues who are husband and wife, who are the rectors at the local Episcopalian church, they had never thought about. I said, you know, when I said it lovingly, and I was there, I said, I got to tell you, this text is a difficult one, and they have a little bit of leeway which text they can choose in the Episcopal Church, and they hadn't thought of it. They hadn't thought about what Christians who only come to church twice a year, that this is what they hear. So I came back from this conference, and one of the head of the community, exactly, the political head of the lay chair of the Swedish. Of the Stockholm Jewish community, said, "What did you learn? What did you take away from this meeting?" I said, "Well, one of the things is that, you know, we need to take a look at our liturgy as well." And I told him how I had already changed the language of Aleinu L'Shabeach, not to say that we have not been, our lot is not like the lot of the others. We have been implying that we're the chosen people, and I've taken out chosen people language from a lot of our prayer. And he said to me, "Do you know what Stockholm syndrome is?" I said, "You mean, yeah, like those that were kidnapped, whenever that was?" I kind of remember. He says, "I think you have Stockholm syndrome." I said, "What?" He says, "I think they've convinced you. They've convinced you that you know that they're right." I said, and this is the head of the Jewish community. That's when I realized there was a big problem with me in Sweden. It took to the end of the contract for that to really play itself out. What I'm saying is that each of us need to look at our own traditions. This is a horrible tradition. This is horrible. The Pirkei Rabbi Lazar says, "Yishmael about Ishmael, Am hadomeh lechamor." The people that are like a donkey in their wit, they're as stupid as donkeys. That's a problem. Now, my advice is not to delete it from the text. Fact is, I brought it here today. My advice is that we all take a look at our traditions together, take a look at going backwards to those problematic texts to understand where they come from. And we could do that, but that's not our topic today, really. Understand where they come from, not in an apologetic way, but to understand it, not to justify it, saying it today, as it is said in many circles today. I know because I was there in those circles in the late 20th century. That continue to use that particular tradition. It's a tradition that I knew beforehand. And I wanted to come clean and bring it. It just wasn't the right atmosphere. I guess that's my lesson. The meta point here is that it just wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right group for it. But I would bring it up if there was a common trust that was built, then I would bring up this tradition as well. I bring it up here because there is this trust, and there is this. We're in a very close group, a very small group, but that I wanted to share with you also, not just my successes, but certainly my failures. And this was a failure. This was a failure. And it's in a moment, we'll pause for some comments or questions. In a moment, I'll talk about another failure. Comments or questions? Okay, so we go to the, yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
I'm amazed that Isaac in these other texts was a willing participant. And then through our text, I've gathered that Isaac kind of bore this as a hatred towards his father, or as a real problem. for the rest of his life.
Right, but should I remind you who you've been studying with for the last few years?
Yes, I do know who that is.
Yeah, that's kind of Zakovich. That's part of, just a moment, Sylvia. So yeah, very much. And I would say that's the pshat. That's the simple meaning of the Torah, I would say. But as you know, the rabbinic meaning it had to take in a different direction, because that's not something the rabbis wanted to teach their children. They didn't. Freud hadn't come along yet to tell them the importance of parental relationships and how that affects their lives. Sometimes there is that insight, but yeah, that's the difference. But it's not just in the Islamic tradition, right? It's in our own tradition as well. I just didn't bring that text that where Isaac is a willing participant. If your point is submission and loyalty, then that makes sense. If your point is, as I would say, the story is against child sacrifice, it's a polemic against child sacrifice, and the point is to say there are limits to what you do for God, what you think you're doing for God. That's my understanding of the story. Then it depends which way you go. And there's truth in all of them, I would imagine. Sylvia.
Well, two things. One is I have always had a problem with this particular story, because I really, if somebody came to, if in the 20th, 21st century, in this day and age, if somebody said, God told me I had to do this, you'd lock him up. I mean, you would lock a guy up who was going to go take his son and kill him because God told him. And yet we take it as a whole different story, that he trusted that God wouldn't kill the boy. I don't think so. I think he trusted that God said to do it, so he had to do it.
Right. So
and we're talking about what's going on today. I just happened to read an article, and I'm not going to get politics into this, but I read the article which republished Hamas's charter. And they think they're right. They think this is religiously correct, that they obliterate all Jews. They're convinced of it. And how do we reconcile these religious and problematical beliefs that we get from Tanakh, or they get from Quran, or the Christians get from the St. Matthew Passion, which is appalling if you ever watched it. It's very confusing to me and disturbing, is really what it is.
a partial answer is why I think Rabbi Marsh asked me to share these experiences with you, the folks. Said this is one way of doing it. There needs to be communication. There needs to be mutual respect. There needs to be mutual understanding and compassion involved. Another way are the various organizations that people right now say are irrelevant, but some people are saying they're extremely relevant. That's all the peace making that goes on between individuals, whether it's children going to camp together, or whether it's people Arab presence in the demonstrations that went on, that were the anti-government demonstrations that went on over the last 8 months in Israel. There's a lot of different. All right. There's a lot of different ways that might give hope, but yes, it's overwhelming, and right now, yeah, there's a gap. I don't want us to get waylaid though by the story so much about about Isaac. This is an example of looking towards our common tradition. At least the template is, let's take what's common and try to work from that. And while it works quite well when it. I'm sorry, I'm just distracted by the cat. So let me go to. Yeah. Okay. While it works quite well, or it works easier when it comes to Jewish-Christian relationships, to find that as common. And the example is what I said, the Book of Psalms. We both hold the Book of Psalms dearly, and we're both very often uncomfortable by some of the Psalms, but realize the Book of Psalms is a wonderful wellspring inspiration and liturgical, creativity, etc. And in Islam, it's more difficult because of the political issue, and that explains why I've had so little over the years compared to how much Christian dialogue I've had with Christians. Had so little compared with Muslims, and so that's one of the things. Another thing is that so let's take the example you used, Sylvia, the passion narrative, which is so difficult for us not just to watch but to read as well. You may know that the passion narrative, as many other narratives, some is common, but there's differences between the four gospels. And even if the three gospels, which we call synoptic gospels, are Mark, John, and Mark, Luke, and Matthew are in agreement about much of it. John is quite different. Before I had a better understanding, I used to say, but I would still say it now, perhaps, is that in the same way we have two creation stories, and we have three stories about the ancestor who said to his wife, "Tell them you're my sister," and we have two versions of the parting of the Red Sea, one in a poetic form and one in narrative form, and two versions of Devorah and Yael, the same thing, poetic. We have, and Chronicles tells a different story. The same way that our Tanakh has different versions that are not compatible. That's part of the built-in, wired-in pluralism in our tradition. So too Christianity. You've got four different gospels talking about Jesus' life here on earth, and that's the only four. Those are the four that we happen to have, right? You've got it's built into what we think, and that's different. The Quran, there are no different versions of the Quran. There are some scholars that have gone that direction, talk about the prototype, but I don't think that there's much traction. Whereas major Christian and Jewish thinkers and writers have embraced the idea of parallel traditions, of multiple traditions in our scripture, and you don't have that in Islam. And I don't say that as a criticism. I say that as a marker for why I've understood it's far more difficult. It's the political issue. It's also how study of scripture, of Quran, works, as opposed to in Judaism, Christianity. I don't have experience studying scripture with Buddhists or with Hindus, so I can't attest to that. So over the years, I was able to make contact with very few imams. One of them lives in the northern part of Israel and did his PhD. He was working on it at the time. He was working on his master's at the time. Since he's finished his PhD, and I'm in touch with him in a village in the northern part of Israel. He did his PhD at Bar Ilan University, and very much that those historical conversations between Jews and Muslims, and we got into a wonderful relationship. And I actually hired him to come down to Tel Aviv. He came for his studies, but stayed on to give a mini course amongst my congregants about Islam, the basics of Islam. So this is in the Masorti congregation in North Tel Aviv, in Ramat Aviv. There was a course going on about the basics of Islam taught by an imam. And I had him talk to the Bar Bat Mitzvah group, and he showed them how to pray. We all got down on our knees and we learned how to pray in the Islamic style. And that's the first time I learned how to. And I can go into a mosque and I stand in the back. I don't stand with everybody else because I'm not a Muslim, but I can more or less go through the motions. I mean that in a positive way. I don't mean in a negative way, going through the motions. And but it was so hard. And I came to understand that the only imams that one can really have this contact with, at least in Israel, are Sufis. They're mystics. Many of them were students of the same Sufi master in Israel. And okay, you take what you can get. And there's overlapping. Some of you may know that Rambam, Maimonides' son, Rabbi Avram ben Moshe, was a Sufi himself, was part of steeped in the Sufi tradition. And there's literature, there's some limited, but still some Jewish literature, which is part of Sufism. While in the majority, this mystic trend is part of Islam, there's a Jewish part of it as well. And but otherwise very, very difficult. Then suddenly I find myself in the aughts with an invitation to go to Doha, Qatar, to participate in an interfaith conference. And the person who got me invited is a friend of mine, Roli Matalon in New York, and he was invited, and they said they wanted to get somebody from Israel. They didn't really know how to do it, but of course they couldn't have just, I couldn't go to Qatar on an Israeli passport, although, yeah, I think some did, and there was a clandestine presence of the Israeli foreign ministry in Qatar. I know because they contacted me as soon as I got there, and he came. And the person who was ambassador level, he had been ambassador in another country, came to talk to me and to kind of give me a. But I went. I was the only one that came from Israel, and I came on my American passport. It was quite an experience. I got stuck because of a late flight in the Amman airport. I was a little nervous at the time. It was Yom HaNakba. It was the day commemorating the tragedy in Islam, in amongst the Arab nations excuse me, I should say the Palestinians, that we celebrate as Yom Mahmud, but they have a date that's called the Nakba. And it was that day, and I was in the lounge together with a member of the Palestinian Authority. I knew because of the pin that he had. It was a very strange, it was a little surreal. I'd never been in an Arab country before. And this is just in Amman on the way, and there was a problem, forgot whatever it was, there was a problem, and they kept the entire flight to Doha for me for 2 hours. Whatever the issue was, they kept it on the ground for 2 hours, because for that was the level that was going on way above my head. I was just doing what I was told. I get to Doha, and they were working on a new airport, and I walked down the stairs. It didn't have a sleeve, and there's a little Philippine woman, a little tiny woman with a big sign that says Rabbi David Lazar. And here I am thinking I'm supposed to be, in the class. I'm not supposed to broadcast it. I'm in Qatar for this is like 2003 or 4. This is quite a while ago from those kind of connections. And then I realized, and they met me right away, and they wished me through, and it was kind of cool to have a VIP treatment like that. Very, very fancy hotel. By the way, at the hotel, when you go to a hotel and you open up the drawer next to the bed, it used to be, it's less so now, but you used to find Gideon's Bible, right? In Doha, you open up the drawer next to the bed, and there's a little prayer rug, little portable prayer rug. And on the ceiling, and these are 5-star hotels, and I went back. I went to this conference 4 times before I realized it was a waste of time. I'll tell you why in a second. But on the ceiling of the hotel room is an arrow, and on the airplane as well, in the front screen of the cabin, it has an arrow as to which is the direction of Mecca for the prayer time. Anyway, it was fascinating to be there. I was there with my friend Roli Matalon, so I wasn't alone. It was really, really quite interesting. And I was asked to speak, and I gave the first year there, I gave kind of a broad idea about my understanding of pluralism, why it's important, based on Psalm 150, the different voices in the orchestra, different instruments, Kolan, Shamata, Hallelujah. And I was given a hard time afterwards in the question and answers, really by only the Palestinians who were there. Were super, super nasty. And had wonderful conversations with Christians from the Middle East and from the rest of the world, and Muslims not from the Middle East. There were really none of the Muslims from the Middle East would talk to me. I took cards. I came back maybe with 30, 40 cards. I wrote to all of them. The only ones that got back to me were like obscure diplomats from, Malaysia, who was hoping that I could give him an invitation so he could get a free trip to Israel, that kind of stuff. Nothing really. There was one imam from England who I remained in touch with for many years, but that's what I came away with. The second year, again, I was invited, or the third year maybe, I was invited to speak, to give a paper again, and I decided to go for a 3-way interfaith study. And I chose the theme of Jonah. after looking around, just like there's some commonality with the Akedah, with the binding of the son of Abraham, with Jonah as well. And I'm not going to tell the story of Jonah. I'm going to assume everybody here knows that, you know, those 4 chapters. We read it on Yom Kippur and the importance of it. But to lead with, just to get an idea, I went from the biblical text to New Testament. I brought 2. I've just brought one of the traditions here. And Megan, if you could read number 5 on the second page.
Matthew 16, 1-4. The Pharisees and the Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, when evening comes, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. In the morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the time. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away.
And reading that, I said, well, what does this mean? Like, so I understand the yelling at the arguing with the Pharisees, Sadducees. You don't get it, right? You don't understand. You don't get it. But I'll give you. You want a sign? I'll give you a sign. The sign of Jonah. And of course, so most people connect it to the 3 days, 3 days in the belly of the fish, 3 days after death, before resurrection. But the point was not so much to learn. The point was to say, let's use this. I was trying to offer an example, a paradigm of how we might do this study together. And my challenge to the group of, I don't know, 100 people or so from different places in the world and the 3 religions was, let's do this. Let's get together. We could already do it online. I had access to very sophisticated video equipment, even, and already by then there was Skype. I think there was Skype, but my 2 high-tech guys that were by funders in the early aughts. They way before everybody else. They had really, really good video conferencing equipment. I said, let's do this study together. I got note takers, but I started with the Christian tradition, and I said, this isn't the time for conversation, but this is what I would envision happening. I brought the text in Arabic as well. And then I purposely brought 6, 7, 8, 9, the way that I did, with the Arabic text as well, because I thought to myself, I'm not just bringing it in English. I want to show respect. I don't read Arabic, and I said that as well. And that's my fault. That's my problem. I need to learn to read Arabic. I need to learn to speak. I believe that is what I should be doing. I don't do it. I need to lose weight also, and I don't lose weight. There's a lot of things I need to do that I'm not getting around to. But this is just part. The sheet kind of looked like this, and we don't need to go through but and I said, this is what I know how to do. My background is an academic background. I'm a rabbi. My emphasis in my rabbinic career has been on study of texts and on pluralism in Judaism. I'd already been to Taizé. I'd already been exposed to really quality pluralistic religious education, and I got there. And after, I don't remember, it was 3 times, it was 4 times, but at some point I just realized this is a waste of time. It's kind of nice. It's nice to go in Qatar Airways in business class and to be exposed to a different culture, and to, of course, 5-star, not the real culture of Qatar, to fascinating insights into what a nation is where I forgot if it's 16% of the population of Qatar are Qataris, the rest are foreign imports, human imports of people. I learned that each nationality has like a different job, like the Pakistanis are the English journalists. I know because I was interviewed by 2, it was a big deal for a rabbi to be in Qatar at the time. I was interviewed by 2 separate Pakistani newspapers, competing newspapers. The drivers oh, by the way, I noticed when I went up on my room, I went up to my room, and there were 2 Qataris, with their white jalabiyas and on the floor, there. And I noticed they were there every time. And so I asked one of the things, I said, so wow, they've got these guys, they're standing on all the floors. I said, no, turns out just on my floor. That was the like extra security. It was a little bizarre. It wasn't, I didn't feel threatened, and I was honored that they were taking care of me in such a way. But eventually it wasn't the Qataris that were important here, by the way. It was all the other people who were coming together, and there just wasn't a real, I didn't find, and Rolly found the same thing. He stopped going as well. We didn't find a real desire for serious dialogue. And I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm not saying, just say this group was more about having this 5-star experience at a fancy hotel in Qatar. Okay. Let me just check my notes. There's some other things I was going to say. In the meantime, do people have comments or questions? Okay, one last story. In Stockholm, I got an invitation I gave this as an example of holy envy, but this is another part of that same story of Guds hus, God's house, this project in Stockholm, in a relatively low-income area where there were no Jews living at all. And they were this is the planning stages of the same building, the same structure that would house a Lutheran, and I said last week Roman Catholic, was a Lutheran, a Protestant, other Protestants. That Lutherans are their own church, and they're really descended directly from Catholicism in Sweden. It's a complicated history, but they're not the same as other. They're actually more similar to the Church of England, and I think maybe the other Protestants were represented by the Baptists there, were very different than Baptists here, and Muslims. And there was a meeting, and I was invited to it, of the clergy at the Imam's house. And I get to the Imam's house, and we sit down for some tea, and and I spoke a little bit of Arabic, and I learned what he does. He was a cab driver. That's when I learned that in Israel you have teachers that are often the imams, and they make their living by being a teacher, and the imam is kind of a side thing. But in Stockholm, 2 of the imams that I knew were both taxi drivers, and what they did by day. But anyway, I'm at his house, and we're sitting down, and there's a Slavic, not a Greek or the Slavic Orthodox priest there with a cassock and representatives of different churches and dignitaries from the mosque, the organization. And as I sit down, he says, "I'm sorry, Rabbi, we're a little bit late with lunch." And I hadn't even thought of lunch. It was like 1 o'clock, and I've never been one to have. I didn't even think of lunch to tell them that I'm a vegetarian, right? And he says, and we're a little bit late because I ordered special halal meat for lunch. And I'm thinking to myself, oh no, shit, I forgot to tell him vegetarian. Second of all, I'm thinking to myself, what does special halal mean? Does that mean that there's different degrees of halal, like there's of kosher? There's kosher style, or it's like, the different. He said, does that mean he got the most strict kind of halal, Muslim halal meat for me? Or does he call kosher because he knows the word special halal? Whatever it is, though, I decided I've got to eat it. How could I not? How could I offend? And we're sitting at this round table. His wife comes with this huge platter with a mound of rice mixed in with this. Turns out it was lamb, right? I hadn't had red meat since I was 12 and a half. I literally have not had red meat. And here I am about that. But there was not a doubt in my mind that of course I have to eat it. Not to eat it is just that I made too many mistakes. And you know what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu will forgive me if I'm eating that. But what did not forgive me was my stomach. I had such a stomach ache that day. Because of course I was very polite, finished, and his wife says, "Oh, you must have some more," and piled it up on my plate again. So look, what am I trying to say? I haven't been terribly successful in local mosques. I wanted to go to the afternoon prayer the last 2 Fridays have been in touch with both the mosques, both of the mosques, which are equidistant from where I live. And one of them having trouble just getting through because my contact moved back to Pakistan. And so, and the imam went before a few weeks ago to Egypt, I guess, to study. Any case, nobody to talk to there. I'm now in touch with another community. I met a number of people there, and somebody from that community came to our interfaith service, got in touch with somebody, and the answer was, we have some threats to the mosque. We have a security situation. This is not the best time. And I totally understand that, whether that is the case and whether they're worried about, whose security is being worried about here. I understand how sensitive it is. I really do. For me, it would be strengthening for me to pray in the mosque together. I've done so on many occasions before the pandemic. I was at the mosque in Coachella every 6 weeks or so, just to keep up the contact with them. Have real deep connections developed, like study group? No. Part of that is because imams are not professionals, clergy, the way the other folks are, that part of their daily schedule is to have lunch with the other clergy, right? There was a guy that was like that, but he moved away, and he was wonderful, just absolutely wonderful, and understood the interfaith dialogue thing from other places where he had lived before. But it doesn't mean that we need to stop. We need to look for those possibilities wherever they lie, and to give them a try. And I think that presenting text, studying text together is a way to do this. It has worked in certain circles, in academic circles, there's something, but doesn't seem to me to be terribly productive. And it's certainly nothing like what we have going on with our actively engaging group with Christians in Texas and different places around the world that we meet every Thursday together. It takes time, it takes trust, it takes mutual respect. It takes open-mindedness, and it takes perseverance. Parting words, parting questions? Yes.
Yes.
Megan.
I think it also takes courage that when you do the interchange, you're not going to say or do something, but you exemplified with everything that will offend the other person. It's really being able to relax and read into what you're reading and trying to dialogue. So I really thank you for what you do. I think there's very few people who do it as deeply as you do it that I come across.
There's an organization.
So thank you.
There's an organization. The name escapes me right now. Andrea, what's Andrea's last name? Andrea's married to Aryeh Cohen, old friend of mine from Jerusalem, was a professor or a lecturer at the Ziegler School of Talmud. Andrea, I'm blanking on her last name. She has a different last name. She's part of a Muslim Jewish group that's been going on for a long while, since even before I got here. I mean, since those years when I was looking. There's an imam, a jihad Turk, who's I think he lives in LA, but he's at starts with a C, university in between, like Fullerton, around that area. They have an interfaith program. You all know where it is. It's not far from where you are. You folks are. And so I was in touch with Jihad, and Jihad was actually on his way here a week before he was supposed to do we were going to watch a movie together and have a conversation, interfaith conversation here, together with the Palm Springs Cultural Center, which shows like old movies. It was a brilliant program, and it never happened because that's when the pandemic happened. we were shut down and just haven't been able to bring it back to life yet from a Muslim point of view. But we'll keep at it. Yeah, we'll keep at it. And there are successful in the larger places. There are. I'm certainly not the only person that does this. But yeah. But thank you for the comment. Anything else?
Thank
you. I hand it back to you, Sylvia.
Yep. Thank you very much. And thank you, Rabbi. Fascinating. And I think that we all agree that the work you do is so important, and so important to bring it back to us. Gives us hope, and it gives us hope in the world. So thank you for that. And I just want to mention, come back next week. And we have, and also get on our website. We have plenty of programs that we sponsor that will help us all in our journey. Also, one other thing, we do sponsor a minyan night, Sunday through Thursday, 6 o'clock your time, Pacific time, and everybody's welcome. You just can register through the website. We're a very nice group. Also, it's good to daven together and be in community together, especially now.
Yes. Right.
Those things.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, folks, be well.
Toda
Forward
rabah.
to see you next week. Yeah.
Have a great day, everybody.
Yes, you as well.
Thank you. Bye.